Thank you for taking my call. Before we continue, could you say the first and third digits of your security PIN? Oh, I didn't catch that. Sorry. That's the second and fourth, please. OK, lovely. All gone through. Did you see what I did there?
It's a scam. Never reveal your full security PIN, even if you think it's your bank calling. Learn how to protect yourself from fraud.
Well, I've got some good news for you. Peter Hitchens is here, and he doesn't want to talk about it at all. So we'll have a little respite for you over the next half an hour. We'll talk about a great many other things instead. Dave says this: he's flagged his father's wife and his brother's wife. He thinks he can come back. He has serious issues. His wife has simply made him very unhappy. P.S. He's 38, all this self-pity, and he's moaning, and he's nearly 40, not 17, like he comes over as. Well, that's another story altogether. Peter Hitchens is here. Very nice to see you, Peter. Welcome.
Well, good to see you.
I feel like I haven't seen you for ages.
We haven't.
We sort of missed each other, haven't we?
We missed each other just before Christmas.
Yes.
And I was here for Kevin last week.
Yes.
So
yes, I saw that.
Has been a while.
It has been a while, but not much has changed, funnily enough.
No, not much.
We've still got national strikes looming.
Yeah. I think, though, the government's belief that they could get public support by having sort of who governs Britain confrontation with the unions is waning a bit. You get the sense that they may realise that this isn't getting the popularity with the red wall which they thought it would. And since everything in the government policy is now driven by an attempt to rescue themselves from the collapse in popularity following the Trust debacle, I think that they may well shift on that.
Although, you know what's interesting, though, is that it's not just the Trust debacle as well, because I'm seeing Trevor Kavanagh this morning writing in The Sun about the sort of the ghost of Boris Johnson looming large and certain people thinking he might come back. I just don't see it. I mean, we speak to an awful lot of people, and even formerly sort of die-hard Boris Johnson fans are not that keen on his return.
I would have thought that unless Rishi Sunak does something really catastrophically stupid, it's going to be very, very hard to get far with that.
Yeah.
He did make a lot of enemies, and his mode of government, which is basically founded on the rules set by the Corleone family, the Godfather, was that anybody who got in your way was pretty much dealt with,
snuffed out,
and frightened into silence.
Yeah.
But once you cease to be prime minister, your enemies can then pop up again and start fighting against you. So without the power of Downing Street, I don't know whether he could do it again anyway. And I just don't think another putsch in the Conservative Party.
And also,
surely that would ultimately. It would not just destroy them at the next election.
Yeah.
That would do them in altogether. I know a lot of people, including me, wouldn't necessarily see it as a bad thing, but from their own point of view, they surely don't want to do that.
No, I don't think they do. And I think also there are those in the media, perhaps, who give a bit more credence to Boris Johnson than the people do. I think most people, as I say, even those who would have voted for him and would hope that he would have been a good Prime Minister, have seen that he's actually not very good at being Prime Minister.
Well, and yet, you see, it's a few years ago we have sat here and said, Johnson, Prime Minister? Don't be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he became Prime Minister.
He did.
So,
but you can't
on those simple basis of never say never and don't rule anything out.
True.
Don't say it will never happen. Just that it's unlikely. It'll suit me.
I think so. Also, I'll tell you what else is unlikely is Rishi Sunak doing something really, really dramatically disastrous, because I think that's not in his DNA. I mean, everything he does is with immense caution, which I think is probably a bad thing, because I think if you're a leader, you need to take chances every now and again, don't you?
Well, I'm not sure what it is that he believes in, if anything at all. That's the problem.
No.
He came out with this totally unmemorable declaration of principles last week.
Yes.
The only thing anyone can remember about it is some plan to make us all do maths until we die.
Which, curiously, wasn't in the 5-point plan.
No.
I mean, even though it was the most important thing of all.
These days, a speech is leaked, and then it's made, and then it's briefed.
Yes.
So there are at least 3 versions of it come out, and it was the thing about the maths, which, as I say, stuck in my mind, and is completely ridiculous.
Yes. Well, also many people from all shades of the political spectrum have said to me, why does he want people to do maths? I mean, most people, if they're doing maths at sort of beyond GCSE level, are pretty good at it, right? Maths beyond GCSE level is quite complicated.
It is complicated.
I've seen my son's, maths GCSE paper, and I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have been able to. And I was quite good at maths.
Well, they've written it so that you can't do it, I think. But we'll come to that. But the thing is that maths is sort of funky, isn't it? It's all to do with coding and the new world of high technology and everything being taken over by computers. And so maths must be modern and good and clean. And if you associate yourself with it, you look trendy and forward-looking and progressive
and clever,
efficient and clever. But in fact, the real problem with maths in this country is that it's not taught properly to young children. The old things we used to have to do, you probably used to have to do it, the chanting of times tables, the relentless doing again and again and again, simple sums until you can do them in your sleep. I
can still do, 11 times whatever because I used to chant it.
Exactly, and that's the only reason you can do it. It's probably one of the most important things you learnt at school as well, but it's not done anymore. Right. I don't know when this came to you, but I just escaped it. They introduced something in my school when I was about 12 called Nuffield Maths, which stopped being about sums and multiplication and division and was all about Venn diagrams and pretty pictures and colourful pamphlets. And the poor people who came into studying maths after that, I think, have been left with the legacy of not knowing how to do anything simple.
I remember log tables. We had a book full of log tables, and I never really understood what that was about.
You didn't need to understand it. You just need to understand you used a book, logs, cosines, and sines. And once you understood how to use the book, it didn't matter. It was a way of doing fantastically huge multiplication by addition, as I remember it. And some people could also master slide rules, which were a great
I could never do that.
Thing of the time.
No, I used to hit people with
it. It always looked so clever when when an economist would get out a slide rule on television. You go, gosh, this guy really must know what he's doing.
Absolutely.
He says we're going to get inflation of 90%. We will. Of course, it didn't know any more than anybody else.
No.
But the other thing we all had in my generation, which I suspect you largely missed, was that we had huge exercises in mental arithmetic all the time from the coinage.
Yes.
And from the weights and measures that we also, I learnt all the...
No, I remember feeling distinctly cheated, in fact, in 1971, when I think I was in my first year at secondary school, because the decimal system came in, and I went, hang on a minute, I've just learnt the entire sort of pounds, shillings and pence system.
Geodecimals and 16 ounces
all of that.
Pound.
Farthings,
14
guineas.
pounds in a stone. And,
And I still really, I kind of missed out on furlongs and all of that kind of thing. So the distance thing is still a mystery to me, really.
A furlong's very useful, particularly for...
There's 8 chains in a furlong, is it?
Hang on, there are 22 yards in a chain.
This is what I mean. I mean, I can't remember. I just remember there's a chain.
10 chains in a furlong. There are 8 furlongs in a mile, and interestingly enough, 5 furlongs in a kilometre.
Yes.
So if anybody puts a kilometre in some official document, I change it to 5 furlongs.
Oh, that's good, because the only time I ever hear the word furlong, of course, is racing, horse racing.
Well, it's still very much used.
Still very much
They also use chains on the railways. If you look on railway bridges, all the measurements of actual railway track is still done in chains, miles and chains.
Well, I somehow missed out on all of that, but I did learn the pounds, shillings, and pence, and all of that. So I still know all that.
Yeah, when you had to do it all the time, you would, if you just wanted to buy a quarter of toffees, which is a quarter of a pound of toffees, and the price of a pound be such and such, you would have to do mental arithmetic in shillings and pence to do it.
Yeah,
and you got very quick and fast at it. And you still see this in some shops you go into. Some of the people can still do it. I've been in shops where I pick something up off the shelf, and they reckon I'm going to give them a pound coin for it, and they've got the change ready in their hands before I give them the pound.
Yeah.
They're that fast.
Yes.
And that used to be completely commonplace.
Yes.
Now it's not.
No. Now most people won't know how to add anything up on a till unless they put it into the machine.
Well, there's 2 explanations for getting too little change.
Yeah.
But there's only one explanation for getting too much change.
Yes.
And I find that quite often you're offered too much change, and it's a sign that people just can't do it anymore. It's not their fault. It's just they were not properly taught. And you could keep them at school till they die, certainly till they were able to vote. And the way we teach maths now, revolutionised as it was in the 1960s, will not teach them. And this lesson, like the basic lesson of how to teach people to read, and teaching people proper history, has not been learned. Politicians keep standing up and saying we're going to fix this. But they can't fix it because they've given the country the wrong kind of schools.
Yes.
And the schools are all about propaganda.
Yeah.
They're not about knowledge.
No, true. And also, rather like the 5-point plan, the mathematics suggestion didn't really have any sort of flesh on the bones. He
Well,
didn't say
do it?
what he was going to teach people. He didn't understand what it was that they might want to learn at that age. And then, similarly, when he talked about, you know, reducing the NHS waiting time, he didn't say how. When he talks about stopping the illegal migrant boats coming, he didn't really explain what was going to happen.
It's as if there's a room somewhere in Downing Street full of brightly coloured levers. You know, fix mathematics, pull that one. Fix the NHS, pull that one. You pull the lever, nothing happens.
No.
Because they don't have a clue how to do it. I mean, for instance, there's a very serious argument to be had in this country about whether we should adopt the French system of health insurance. And healthcare. I personally think we could pretty much take it on as a whole, just copy it. And we would then transform for the same expenditure our health service from one which doesn't work into one which works. And people could actually discover the joys of a properly run state backs, but not states. But not
instead of which we're led to believe
system.
by the unions involved that if we give them more money, then that will fix it.
But this has been proven to be untrue. It's over and over again we give them more money. And the other great disaster, of course, was the Blair belief that by going for the private finance initiative, which loaded so many major hospitals with debts for decades to come, we would solve the problem. Of course, it created a lot of very flashy new hospitals, which were splendid in themselves, but it created debts which made it impossible for them to run properly. We have just done it so badly. And the things are not debated.
But isn't the problem effectively, and I'm going to give you some time to answer this because I'm going to stop in a minute, isn't the problem effectively the fact that simply there are too many people now accessing the NHS, too many of them are living too long, and there simply isn't enough money to cover it all?
I don't believe so. I think exactly the same problems face the French health service, which has France has pretty much the same population and a similar tax base to us, and yet they manage it much better. Organisation can make a big difference, and oddly enough, it seems that the insurance-based system which they use works better than the one which we use. And you look at Jeremy Clark's amazing columns in Low Life in The Spectator. He's very seriously ill, but he's being treated in the French system. And the contrast between the sort of treatment he gets and the sort you would get in similar circumstances in Britain is astonishing to read. And I think, but you hear, whenever I talk to people who live in France about this, they say, I would never ever fall in Britain if I could possibly avoid it. I would come back to France to be ill because the treatment is so much better. And I really don't see why we don't consider this in more detail, but you never hear it studied. Any suggestions was, oh, well, if you want to get rid of the NHS, what you want is the American system. But I don't.
Well, no.
Nobody wants the American
we'll come back to that because we're going to take a little break. Peter Hitchens is here. We're talking about the NHS, but we will talk about other things as well. Coming up after this on TalkTV.
All the lifts and the plumbing.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on TalkTV. Just talking to Peter Hitchens about his new renovated building, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. Talking of all things to do with the NHS, there's a vote, I believe, this afternoon, or a ballot of some kind, to see whether junior doctors are going to go out on strike. I think if you were saying there's not much thirst in this country for a government that wants to take on the unions in a kind of battle royale, if you like. But I don't think there's much thirst for support for the strikers either.
Well, especially not for people who have direct medical responsibilities. I absolutely believe, for both for strong moral and practical reasons, that people who are nurses, doctors, or paramedics should not strike.
No,
I don't say they should be banned from striking. I think it should be plain to them that they should not strike. And in return, the nation has to recognise that they don't have the freedom to withdraw their labour and has to treat them better. And I think it's very, very sad that we should have got ourselves into a position where it should even be discussed that doctors should strike. I don't know how anybody who is a doctor, who's devoted his or her entire training to mercy to other people, to the relief of pain and suffering, could ever say, I won't treat you. There is no form of medical treatment. Some of them which may seem trivial compared with a major operation, which does not offer mercy and help to people. The basic act of seeing a patient, of reassuring them with your skills that what they've got is treatable, for instance, is the start of most cures. People leave a doctor's appointment feeling better than they went in. How can you withdraw that from people morally? It's not possible. And how can any government be so foolish as to allow the pay and conditions of doctors and nurses and paramedics to get so bad that they find themselves with leaders who are prepared to do this? And the other thing is, how do they find these leaders? I'd have to say, I reckon if I led a group as popular as the nurses, and I couldn't think of a way of getting them a decent improvement in paying conditions without going on strike, I'd look for another job.
Yeah.
Striking is an absolute last resort. It's a very blunt instrument, too.
Right. And while you say this, it reminds me, I think I might not have seen you since I saw you on Question Time, which was presumably sometime in December.
It was.
Because you were with Pat Cullen, who rather ludicrously, after you said all that, accused you of some kind of misogyny.
Oh, I know, it was absurd.
Which seemed ludicrous to me.
I thought it was very poor.
I thought you dealt with it very well, though.
I thought it was very poor. My opinion of it fell quite considerably during that exchange. I thought, this is not proper argument. She should be able to do better than that. I was giving her perfectly rational criticisms, and also pointing out something which I will point out again because it's not much covered. The ballots for the nurses' strike were not undertaken in a single ballot across the country, but hospital by hospital. Yeah. And the reason for that is simple. The leadership of the Royal College of Nursing were not confident that their members fully support the strike, and they didn't want to risk a national ballot which they might lose. Yes. And I think anybody looking at this must be aware of the fact that support among nurses, for the reasons I've just discussed, for an actual strike is obviously naturally thin. I mean, you hear stories of nurses going out on the picket line in the morning, shouting a few slogans, and then hurrying into work. Yeah.
Well, there's no question that an awful lot of the people who are on the picket lines are not nurses at all. Well, many of them are not even in the Royal College of Nursing. They're sort of ancillary sympathisers, if you like, but they don't want to identify who they are because, secondly, because that might be called secondary picketing. Also, an awful lot of nurses didn't vote to strike, and an awful lot of nurses are not actively striking.
No, it's interesting. When we did Question Time, it was down in Winchester, and in Winchester the hospital was not on strike that day because they had not voted for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating situation, and I think if the junior doctors do vote to strike, and if they do actually do what they're threatening to do, I think that would be a massive error on their part. So I think the NHS is already useless, and one of the points I made when the Royal College of Nursing, and indeed the ambulance drivers and the paramedics went on strike, was actually it wasn't any worse, because it can't get any worse. You couldn't get an ambulance before they went on strike, so you couldn't get one when they went on strike.
You won't be able to tell, but I remember when I was an industrial correspondent many years ago being reassured by my friends in the unions that an ambulance workers' strike would not mean a deterioration in the emergency service. And a few days after that, I was out on the Finchley Road in North London, and I witnessed a traffic accident. Right. It was before the days of mobile phones. I heard the crunch of the vehicle going into somebody's bone crossing the road, and I was the one who got to the telephone first. And I dialed 999, asked around, and they said, it'll be ages, mate, because of the strike. And at that point, the scales fell from my eyes. The assurances that I had from my union friends it would be okay were empty. They couldn't do it. Fortunately, my own GP was just round the corner. I went, banged on his door, and he came out and did what he could for the person who'd had her leg broken by a car. But it was horrible. Yeah, I bet. And you can't do it. You can't do that. So I've always been completely against it ever since.
And speaking of the NHS, I guess we should finish up with you wrote a piece last week about the mask scenario.
Yes, indeed.
Once again, it was astonishing to see how eager some forces of nature were in this world who wanted masks to be brought back. It would appear, because we spoke to our statistician friend, Jamie Jenkins, last week, and he said it looks as though the latest sort of panic about COVID has peaked, and in fact most of the cases are now going down. But it wasn't amazing how quickly people wanted to bring masks back.
Yes, and how quickly some people wanted to wear them again. I mean, I saw it on the tube this morning of people doing it again. Yeah. And there are two things. There are authoritarians who desire the obedience of people, and also there are remarkable and alarming numbers of people who wish to obey, which is one of the reasons I say, look, if you want to wear one of these things, absolutely your affair. I will never reprove you or criticise you for doing it. That's what you want to do. If you think it's a good idea, please do it. But do not put pressure on anybody else to do the same thing. Do me the same favour. You're free to do it. I'm free not to do it.
Yes, exactly right.
And it's not. It remains the case that the whole frenzy for wearing masks didn't come from science or medical knowledge. It came from political pressure.
Yeah. And it remains a sort of political football, because Mark Harper, who had been quite anti-mask and anti-COVID restrictions when he was on the backbenches, who now is in government, when he was asked last week, would you wear a mask in public, he said that it would be sensible to do so if you were suffering from anything.
Well, apparently I saw that when Johnson was doubtful about wearing a mask during the Great Panic, they kept showing him pictures of other world leaders wearing masks, saying, you're the only one who's not doing it. It's just conformism. Right. They didn't come up with a randomised controlled trial which showed that the evidence absolutely demanded they said, here, look, lots of other people are doing it.
Well, I always quote from my interview with a guy called Chris Philp, who at the time was the Justice Minister, because I put it to him that despite the fact that London Underground and TfL were actually saying it was a legal requirement to wear a mask, I said, I don't think it is. Do you believe it to be a legal requirement? And he wasn't sure, and then he said it was the right thing to do to wear a mask. And I said, well, what does that even mean? And he said, well, it's the right thing to do. And he couldn't really explain it. He just kept parroting this kind of phrase, that it was the right thing to do. And I said, well, if I don't wear one, am I doing something terribly wrong? And he didn't know how to answer that either.
No, it's all very, very strange.
Very odd.
It's left the country, after the whole experience, it's left the country less free than it was before.
I think so. But luckily, there are still some of us who have some sense left. But anyway, Peter, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens back, of course, next Monday as well. Lots more for us to talk about. Loads of you want to